Okay, this is a little tutorial on how to get your goblin that's been rigged, possibly with the head, to now have a jaw controller. And the way we want to bring this in is, I'll read in the rig, kind of probably how a lot of you have your rig done. You've got the constraints here, and you've got the character, and it's something that you can rotate. This is just basic weighting of the body. You want to sort that out. And now we're going to get into kind of redoing the head. First of all, one of the fixes you want to do, if you haven't already, is you want to come in here and turn off the layer for the mesh. Make sure that this pivot point for this controller is down at in the middle of the neck or the head controller, because that's really where it should be. So the way that I'm going to do this, since I'm on a PC, is I'm going to press Insert, and I'm also going to press V, and that is going to lock it so that it pops to any other vertex, or in this case the middle of the skeletal bone here, but it's getting distracted by all these other mesh parts. So I'm going to turn off the mesh from my layer. In fact, I'm going to just have an easier time after that of popping it over into the middle of that bone, so now that when I rotate the controller, it actually rotates appropriate to the bone. So that's pretty cool. So the first thing we want to do is take this head, which is in reference mode, and we can grab it up here. So you get the head mesh, and we want to go up under the rigging mode in Maya and make sure the skin says unbind. Under the skin menu, unbind it. Next thing I want to do is go into the modeling mode, and under mesh I want to separate it. So this is now in its separate parts, if you have in fact combined the head like I did. Next thing I want to do is specifically grab the top of this new group with its history here and go up and delete by type, not all, but delete by type history. So now it's actually the separate parts. And I can come in and rename this goblin head mesh, because this is the actual mesh now, and I can separate these out. So I will unparent them and get rid of this empty null node, which means nothing now. So I can rename this to mesh. And I'm going to copy the name, and I'm going to paste the name. And instead of head mesh, I'm going to have I left mesh. Copy that, paste that as a name, and just change R. Okay, so now we have the goblin head, and we have the goblin body, and the next thing we want to do is actually install another bone for the jaw. You see this head joint is nice, but it does not actually have a jawbone. So the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to grow another bone from here out to where I think the jaw should be, and try to make it so that that is the a new bone that's non-disruptive to this head bone. We still need this head bone to control the goblin. So the way I'm going to do that is go up into the rigging mode, and under skeleton I'm going to create a joint. I don't need to actually connect it to this yet, because I need it to be somewhat independent. So the jaw, if you kind of touch on your own head where your jaw begins, it's kind of up here near the ears. So I think this is a pretty good place right here to have the jawbone start for me, because that's kind of where the mouth is going to open the most. So I'm going to just put a bone that leads right out to here so I can see it pop outside of this character's head. And once I've got this free floating bone, which is kind of cool, I can actually go up here to select the bone for the head, and in the outliner press F, and it'll show you where that bone lives in the head. I'm going to grab this new one, which I want to call jaw, and let's say jaw end. And I'm going to grab this with my middle mouse key. I can do one of two things. I can just grab the head joint, and I can grab then the jaw joint, and I can parent it. Depending, of course, you want to make sure that you've got the right order in which you've selected them, and then press press P in the right order. So you want to select jaw first and head second, and then press P. You can do it that way. You see how it connected a nice little bone that way. Or you might want to go and drag it, middle drag it to under this bone. The first thing we want to do is, since we've drawn it from the side, make sure it's also in the proper place from the front, and you might want to check out from perspective real fast. That's pretty much where I want it. That's fine. I only need one bone for the joint. So in this case, I'm going to grab the jaw, I'm going to control, select the head, and press P, and it automatically connects it to my existing rig, which is pretty cool. So since I also want to create controllers, in this case for the eyes, I can do the same thing by coming over here and putting little bone joints here in the middle of this geometry. But notice that that's separate geometry, so we don't need to worry about this just yet. Meaning we don't have to create the bones for these eyes. We can do the jaw first and then sort of retroactively add the eyes later, because it's different geometry we'll be skinning. So in this case, it's okay that we're just doing the head. So grab this new goblin head mesh, and let's just really quickly do some duplicates of the geometry for expressions. So I've got an expression here, and I'm going to duplicate it again and drag it out so that if I come in really close, I can do real fast blend shape for these vertices here. Just going to quickly go in and in soft selection, grab what I need to and raise it up. So I've got this kind of sneering smile. So this dastardly fellow, like so. And this will be surprise. So he's now sort of questioning what's going on. And you can, of course, name these heads, so that I've got goblin head surprise and smile. Now remember, these are going to be named when you make these meshes. They're actually going to be named the expression, but you can change that a little later on. So I'm just going to leave them be for now. So I've got both these two heads. I select them first. I select the base head last. I do not have eyes in any of these, and that's exactly the way I want it. And I want to come up here to deform and go down to blend shape, selecting blend shape. And in this case, I'm going to have a node called expressions, and just going to apply those. So now we have some blend shapes on the head, and I can just make those heads invisible. And now that I have an influence on this head coming in, I want to check it real fast. So come up to Windows, Animation Editors, go down to Shape Editor, and I want to verify that these expressions actually work. Now, a bit of a mistake here, although the mesh actually worked just fine. Usually you don't want to mess too much with an area that has the eye holes so that the eye geometry is exposed. Usually. Now, this model was built very nicely, because if I select the eye geometry and make it disappear, there actually is this sort of geometry hole that they've pinched in the back, so that the eye does not look like it's just sort of in a you can see cracks and you can see through the head. They did a very good job about that. But usually you don't want to raise up the expression too much. So actually I'm going to kind of mellow this down just for now. So I'd use it about there. And of course we got our little smile. So that's wonderful. So select the head bone and then shift select the head geometry. By the way, one of the things you want to do with the skeleton first, if you want to select the whole skeleton, you want to go up here to in the rigging mode and make sure that before we bind, you actually have gone to the bind pose. And apparently this pose not achieved, seek diagnostics. Let's figure out what's going on there. the problem comes from the fact that we are not able to set the bind pose because the skeleton is still adhering to things like the multiple influences that we have coming in on it. So even if we were to grab say the mesh skin, go to bind pose, it's going to give us an error. The reason is you're asking it to go back to a pose, but it's kind of also being pushed and pulled in many different directions by the constraint system. So what you want to do is come up here to modify, go down to evaluate nodes, and turn on ignore all. Now what this is going to do is this is going to have the rig briefly ignore everything coming in. So when I hit ignore all of those things are, if you just check them real fast, they're all turned off. This is no longer adhering to anything, IK solvers or constraints or expressions, the whole thing. So if I were to grab this controller and rotate it now, you wouldn't actually see any effect on the body. See? But this frees this character up for me to grab the bones, the top of the bones, and say, I would like you to go to the bind pose, and Maya does not have a problem. It went to the bind pose. You should be able to do this also with the body mesh, which I have as a reference, so I can't select it. But you can come up here to skin and go to bind pose, and it shouldn't argue with you either. So the skeleton is now in the bind pose that you bound the body in, and we can add some more geometry. So in this case, I've grabbed the neck, because again, we're not going from the chest too far down, not going from the heads too far up. We actually want that little section. Actually, we do want the head. Good thing we checked. So we want to do this right from where the geometry stops for the body, and it starts for the head. So let's go and select that bone, select that new geometry, and just come up here to skin and check your setup for things. And I'm going to select joint hierarchy because I want everything on here, and just hit apply. And after this, you want to check really fast, well, does this joint have agency? Yes, it does. It needs some weighting, but it is in fact weighted badly, but it is connected, which is really all we care about. So if you move the constraint to the head, you can rotate. Well, that's not going to work because we need to turn on all of our evaluations again. So if I rotate the bone, it'll respond. That's how you can check, like so. Again, very bad weighting. Dobby, nice ears. But if you turn on the modify, evaluate nodes, evaluate all, watch it pop back into shape. Pop. So now you can grab the constraint to the head and rotate it, and it's doing just fine. Fine, of course, being relative until you weight it correctly. And it's not just working with the jaw, it's also still working with these expressions. So you should be able to double those up. Now, if you are not getting the desired effect, because let's say you rigged it the head first and then put on expressions, you can check in the order which with Maya is considering the different deformers for this head by clicking on the model, right-clicking, and going all the way down to inputs, and then go to the bottom, all inputs. And you get this window here that shows you what it's considering first. And you should have skin cluster first at the top, blend shape afterwards. If your blend shape is actually first, let's do a simulation here. And I'll bend this head over a bit. So if your simulation is first, you may get undesired effects. So how you change this order is that you actually middle click on one of these controllers and then move it up or move it down. I've had better luck actually moving things down than up. So let's grab the skin cluster and move it down. Okay, look, now it's not really responding. Not really, it's being weird, but it's not really responding to the rotation because the influences are out of order. So let's sort this again by bringing blend shape as the second consideration and putting skin cluster first at the top. So I'm going to middle select my middle mouse button on blend shape, drag it down under skin cluster, and pop it's now back to what I need it to do for now. So that is how you get things going and how you put in a new jaw controller even after your character has already been rigged. Okay, this is in case you want to add a really quick constraint system for the new jaw controller. The one that I like to use is my go-to, which is NURBS primitive circle. And then if we wanted to quickly dress this up, you can come into the settings for, the attribute editor for it. Go down here to object display, go down to drawing overrides, turn on enable overrides. We've been over this with the constraint system, and just give it a nice kind of loud color. I think green's pretty good. Green's pretty loud. So now that we've got this green controller, we can bring it up to about where the jaw would be, and I'm going to turn off the meshes because that's going to allow me clarity to just pop this using V, holding down the V key while I translate this over to the bone that I actually am going to manipulate with this. And then I'm going to rotate this to sort of match the angle. That's all I really need. The next thing that I need to do is I want to come up here under Modify and freeze the transformations so that this rotate X is perfect. This rotate X alignment is now the new 0. So if I want the goblin to shut his bloody mouth, I can just come in here and put in 0 for the X, for the rotate X. And to kind of quickly grab all these other controllers and move them in, I can come in here to control vertex. Let me turn off these because they're kind of being problematic right now. 1, 2, 3, and I'm going to just drag them in. So they'll be kind of inside the goblin's head, and we don't see his huge retainer coming out of his face. Go back to object mode. I'm going to turn the meshes back on, so now it looks like he's got this little kind of beard. And I want the bone to follow this new controller, and I also want the controller to be in the hierarchy. So down here I've got NURBS circle. What I want to do is I want to put it under head constraint because that's the last constraint that we have. And so I can do one of two things. I can either, grab both these objects in order, press P, or I can just grab this and middle mouse click, drag it up and drop it, which is what I'm going to do there. And I'm just going to control copy and control paste. So I've got the word constraint on there, and then I just type in jaw. So this is the new jaw constraint. I'm going to briefly turn off the meshes again and turn on the bones because I now have a bone I want to have follow this new constraint. So the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to grab the bone, then I'm going to grab the constraint, come up here to constraint and go over to orient, and I want to maintain the offset because this is the new this is kind of the new 0 that I want, and this rotation may not be 0 and this rotation may, so it may snap. You don't need that. The other thing I want to do is keep up my jaw constraint here visibly in the outliner so that when I add a constraint I don't see a constraint pop down here. Let's watch if that was done correctly, and it was not, because the constraint should not be there. It should actually be on the bone. So in this case I'm just going to press undo, Z, and I'm going to go in, and this is just production. You don't have to worry about getting it right the first time. You can just continually grab what you need to and then try a different order. Since you've still got the window up, you can press apply, and in this case the window doesn't disappear because you hit apply, not add, and the jaw constraint does not have the constraint under it. It is in fact the bone up here, jaw, that has the constraint under it. So this now should be in the correct order, and you can do a little rotate to make sure it's all copacetic. And if you like it, just turn on the meshes and see if it responds. Again, that's a weighting issue, but it does look like I'm able to control the jawbone because I can still see it in there. So that's a nice fast way to put in a controller to your jaw and your surprised goblin.